So today we're going to talk about the 600A system and how to service it. First of all, we don't recover 600A. 600A we're allowed to vent, not like all the other refrigerants where we have to have a machine pull that gas out and put it into a storage container. With this refrigerant, we're going to vent. So in order to do that, there's a kit that gives you this long hose. It's about a 20-foot hose that you're going to attach to the system, and you're going to vent that refrigerant out. So the thing is that we'll see if this piece works well. I've noticed that these kits, this piece comes off to attach to your access valves like this. These sometimes don't work that great. I've noticed here, like look, this just came right off. And it's supposed to lock on with like a little lock right here and hold it. Right now it's not locking. Let me see if I can try that again. So this piece has like a collar and it has like this little lock here. It's not even holding it. I don't know if someone bent it or what, but you can't use this if it won't hold this piece on there. And inside of here, this little piece is like a check valve where it allows pressure out but doesn't allow pressure back in. So we're going to try to make this work on a system. Let's see if it fits my gauge here, which it does. So we're going to use it without this check valve. I have seen this piece leak, so I don't trust this adapter even if it is brand new. And the hoses that come in these kits, they use these little clamps. They're supposed to be the hoses you use to service a refrigerant system. You know, in most refrigerant systems, we pull a vacuum, we pull down to what we call 500 microns. We have a special gauge that measures how deep the vacuum is. And these hoses will not let you even get close to 500 microns. You can use a regular set of gauges and hoses, and we're going to do that on this system. But let's first talk about, let's just assume that this compressor is bad. We're not going to change it. What we're going to do is we're going to say, well, if I had to change this compressor, how do I get the refrigerant out? How do I get the gas out? And how do I service it? A lot of people are talking about lock ring, and lock ring is a good tool, but we've used those and even those have leaked. And lock ring is just a way to put two pipes together with a fitting where you can use a torch, but you have to be very careful because the thing about 600A is it's called isobutane, and isobutane has butane in it. Butane is what's inside of those lighters, and if you're not careful, it's very flammable. So what we have here is we have a pair of locking pliers that actually pierce and give you an access valve in order to access the system. So what we're going to do is we unplug the refrigerator, and we're going to attach to the process stub of the compressor this locking plier. So what we're going to do is just going to bite down on here, and it's going to pierce through the pipe like so. Now that should pierce through the pipe, hopefully, if it's done correctly. Now what we want to do is we want to hook up our hose here, which is our venting hose. Now what they do say is put it far enough away from the appliance, and if you can vent it outside to the outdoors, it's even better. I'm just going to take this vent and vent it as far away from the refrigerator as possible. And now we're going to just screw this on here. And let me see something. If I have a way to press down on the cord here, it doesn't have a cord depressor, so that's not going to work. It doesn't matter what color hose we're using. I'm just using the yellow hose on the low side, and I'm going to put this hose, which is the vent hose, which is venting away from the refrigerator. You try to put that outside or as far away from the electrical as you can, and then we're going to attach our hose here, and the hose is going to give us a pressure reading of the system, And when it's off, we're going to pressure read. So what we do is we open this up and we just let this vent out into the air. This is supposed to be running out into the air here. Now, when it gets down to 0, should be any refrigerant left. Now remember, we're only talking about grams of refrigerant, where a regular refrigerator, we're talking about ounces. Grams are much smaller than ounces. But we're supposed to be venting this out. I'm just going to double check here. There's a little bit coming out. I can hear it. There's not a lot to measure on the gauge. Now I'm going to let this run for a minute, and then I'll double check to see if I can still hear it leaking out. If I close it, it might rise up the gauge just a little bit, but the pressure is so low, it's not really going to register on this, and some of it's already been vented out. So we let this out. Now when we let it out, before we do any service where we light a torch in there, there might be some residual 600A left in the system. So what we want to do is we want to cut the dryer filter out of the system. We don't want to use a torch and try to remove that from the system. We want to cut it out. So this unit was running, and I'm going from the low side, so the low side pressure was real low, so I'm letting the refrigerant flow back around and try to run out. And it's still slightly leaking out. Now, while this is happening, you want to be very careful of any electrical sparks or anything that might ignite this gas from coming out, but it should be venting out away from it. And it should take about a minute to do this. Now, if we had a second pair of these locking pliers, we would also go over here on the dryer filter and do it from the high side as well. So we're venting it out from both sides of the system. Okay? Once we've vented it out and we've removed the refrigerant, we'll go ahead and remove our valve. There's a little bit coming out of here. I'm just going to let it go out like that for a minute. Now in the meantime, what we want to do is we want to go ahead and change this dryer filter. But the dryer filter is up in there, so we don't have a lot of room here to solder. Now what we want to do is we want to cut the capillary tube off and let that vent out any remaining stuff from the high side. And I'm just going to take this capillary tube. What they did is they just coiled it around the dryer filter, so we have plenty of capillary tube here. Now we just want to let that vent out. Now the other thing is I'm going to go ahead and just cut this piece off. I'm going to break it off. This is where the factory had put on. Now notice the caps have these like red coverings on them. When you work on 600A units, all the service valves should have a red cap on them to let you know they had 600A in the system. Okay? So now you're like, well, how do I know all the 600A's out? I don't want to go ahead and put a torch on here with this gas in there. So I'm going to cut this off. Then once I cut it off, I'm going to put my valve back on here, and then I'm going to take the nitrogen and attach nitrogen to this and let it flush the system out. Try to push that 600A out of the system. So where's my small tubing cutter? Can you hand me that, Carl? And then if you could bring that nitrogen tank. So now what I want to do is I want to take the 600A out. I'm sorry, the dryer filter for the 600A out. And any remaining refrigerant that's in there, which is very little, should be vented out of the system. We're going to go ahead and just cut this out of there. Okay, now the dryer filter is out. There really should be no trapped refrigerant inside the system, but we want to make sure, right? Okay, so now that we let all the gas out, we flushed it with nitrogen, I'm going to go ahead and cut and remove this access valve from the system. Now this is the process stub. So this is the low side of the system, just like any other refrigerator. Probably should have picked this up, put it on a table so I could do it standing up, but it's okay. So I'm going to cut this off. Alright, and we're going to stick an access valve in there, like so, and I'm going to go ahead and solder that on. Now, a lot of people are afraid. They're like, oh man, this had R-600A, it's got isobutane. There should not be any flammable gas left in the system after we flushed it out with nitrogen. So it should be able to just light this thing up and solder that valve right on there. Guess what? Still has a little gas in it. Do you see that? So we're going to wait a few seconds before I can let any more pressure off. Now, the thing is that you can't recover it. So since I put nitrogen in there, the nitrogen hasn't purged back out of the system. And we'll try that again. Shouldn't be any gas left in there. Now, before I do that, you know what? Let me get the process tube adapter and try to flush it out one more time. So flush it out a little more, we can go ahead and use this kit. And I showed you guys how to use this kit the other day. There's another video on it. Just make sure I get the right size seals. Someone didn't put them in order here. So this one's going to fit on there. So we're going to take this, slide this over, slide these seals on, and then we're going to try to connect the nitrogen one more time and flush it out a little bit more. It didn't flush out completely.
What kind of kit is that?
I'm sorry?
What type of kit?
That kit's called a process tube adapter kit. Can you show that to her? Well, here. Got it on the video? Okay, can you show that to her? So that process tube adapter kit allows you to connect valves right to the end of a pipe. And I demonstrated it once before on a video. I'll have to look it up. I did order from one of my technicians recently, and I'll get you the price, but I don't know it off the top of my head. Carl, can you bring this a little bit closer for me? Tilt it back. That's good enough. I think that the hose is long enough. Alright, so it didn't flush out good with the other valve I had on there. It was leaking. So I'm going to go ahead and pressurize this system. Now I can feel it coming out of my capillary, where I didn't feel it coming out of the capillary tube before. And you can hear it coming out of my high side. So I'm flushing out both sides of the system through here. I'm just going to let it run like that for a minute. You saw how it flamed up on me a little bit. That was that isobutane still trapped in the system. So by using nitrogen, very low pressure, about 80 to 100 psi, I'm flushing it through and trying to push all that isobutane out. And it should only take a few seconds.
To the end of the pipe, get the filter.
No, the process stuff. It was an access valve on the low side. I could have put it onto the pipe where the dryer filter was, but only on one side, not the capillary tube side. And by going into the low side, it flushed both the high and the low side of the system out. It flushed the whole system out. So by putting the nitrogen in, that should have chased any more remaining refrigerant or butane that was in there out. And a lot of people are afraid to work on it because that butane, they think it's going to blow up. Now you saw, I'm glad it actually had a little bit of a flame when I did it because it had refrigerant in it, but it didn't blow up on me. I flushed it out, but it didn't flush out good because I had taken the valve off and put it back on. It didn't seal well. So now I feel pretty confident that I flushed out everything I did. There shouldn't be any more flame coming through here at this time. So I'm going to go ahead and try to braze this on now. Wow, there's still some in there. Look at that. That's not good. So there's still some in there. I gotta let it out. We'll wait. But the fact that I flushed it through, there shouldn't really be much in there. So what else could you do to try to get this out? Yes.
Vacuum it.
Well, if it was a sparkless vacuum, because they don't want that spark in the motor of your vacuum pump to spark it. But yes, sir.
Is it like the same thing when you push like an AC system in the car, like where you kind of set a vacuum? So that's the only way you could get anything to flush it throughout is with the nitrogen.
I'm sorry. In any AC system, nitrogen would be used to flush the system out, if that's what you're asking.
Right.
Car or central air or refrigerator, nitrogen would be used in all those same instances. Okay? I'm going to try to solder this up this time. Now, if you're changing a compressor, there might be a little bit of that residue butane caught in the compressor. If you're changing the compressor, you might get that little bit of flame. There's still a lot in there. There's still a lot in there. I'm gonna have to flush it out some more. I don't know why it's still in there. Let's try it again.
Do you think it's mixed with the oil in the compressor or something?
Yeah, but with the nitrogen, it should flush out. How long should I flush it? You know what I mean? Carl, turn the tank on again for me, please. Okay. Let's let it run for a minute. Because it's coming out of the capillary tube. And it's coming out of this, no problem. That's flushing that out. And I can feel the capillary tube. You guys want to feel this? What's coming out of here? Or here? Feel the capillary tube.
Yeah.
And then feel the other line. You can see that all the way up in there.
Yeah.
So let's let it flush out for a minute. There shouldn't be anything in this system when I flush it out this long. It should be all pushed out. Now, normally, if you're going to do a job like this, you might most likely be changing the compressor. So you wouldn't use a torch to take this. You would cut this out with a tubing cutter and remove the compressor. So some of that butane might be trapped in the compressor, so that's why I want to flush it out a little bit longer. Let it back out this way. And I'm going to do it one more time. So what I did there is I let the nitrogen in, but then I let it come back out the way it came in.
Rich, I'm gonna run and grab my charger.
Okay, go ahead. One more time, let it flush out. I'll do it one more time. We don't want any more back flare up of the flame. Well, nitrogen you can let out into the air. Nitrogen's not harmful. So you could flush with nitrogen, and the butane, it's so small, you can let it into the air. It's not going to be like, oh man, I'm filling out the customer's house with all this flammable gas, you know? So let's hope this time I can light it with a torch without a problem. As much as I flushed it out, let's see if this will work now. There we go. Okay, so I soldered the access valve on. Notice that we didn't have any flame or any flare up coming up. So I guess after flushing a couple of times, I got all the isobutane out of the system. So I recommend doing it about 2 or 3 times, trying to get it out of the system. Now, the hard part's going to be coming here and going to be brazing a dryer filter in this spot, because we have all these electrical wires here, and that heat is not good for this. So we're going to have to protect that area and figure out a way to get that filter in there.
Put rubber around it?
Huh?
Something non-flammable like rubber?
Well, we do have our flame guard that we put in there to protect it, but go ahead and pause the video for a second. It does is enlarges the tube so that they can fit together. So we're going to go ahead and swedge
Can I try doing
the
that?
dryer filter. Excuse me?
Can I try doing that? Can I try doing that?
Well, if you want, you can do it on something else right now.
Please.
So what you do is you have to stick it up as high as is around. This is a lot higher. This isn't the same side pipe, but look, it's close to it and it's too high. So what you want to do is you want it only about the height that it is around. So if it's a 1/4 inch pipe, it always should be a 1/4 inch high. So when you stick this in there, that's about how high it should be on the swedging block. And once you got that there, hold it with your 2 fingers like this, and and what that does is it widens this tube up. And will allow it to fit over the other pipe inside here for brazing. So I made it a little bit too big. So that size is not 1/4 inch, it's smaller than a 1/4 inch. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to cut this off and then adjust it a little bit so that it fits tighter. What happened is, this is a 1/4 inch tube and that tube is smaller than a 1/4. It might be about 1/8. And so when I swedged it, it made it too big. So I'm gonna have to I want to make it so it fits in there. So I'm going to take my swedge first, and I'm going to just tap it in a little bit. Now if you try to do this without the swedging block, it ain't going to work. You're going to bend the tube or damage it or something. But I want to make it larger, but not as large as it is here. That's too big. So sometimes I'll just take and clean it out and ream it out and see if it'll fit over that pipe. And it's not fitting exactly, so we're going to try to do that one more time. But we're not going to go all the way with the swedge this time. And watch, I'll show you what I'm talking about. Before we went all the way down to here with the swedge. So now I'm going to stick it in, but I'm only going to tap it about halfway.
Now, is there a tool to know exactly how far you can tap it in, where the swedge won't get, it won't get too big?
Well, usually when you're swedging, it's taking two tubes of the same size and making one larger so that they can fit inside each other. Okay? But if right now I went ahead and I opened it up just a little bit, but it was just enough where this Drier filter fits perfectly tight. Look at that. It fits right on there. So I didn't go all the way like the first swedge that I made. So that's important. Now that's copper to steel. So one, I want to sand it real clean, and I want to use flux when I braze on it. And then the third thing is, instead of using this stick solder, which is only 15% silver, I want to use the 45% silver, which is a little bit lower melting point, makes it easier to braze on there. So I can go ahead and pause it now while we're going to sand it and clean it. Well, let's see how it looks. Where's my mirror?
Right behind you.
Grabbed one. Well, I'll be dang. I don't have a flashlight, but I think I soldered it. Well, let's see. I'm going to go ahead and attach the capillary tube to it, and then we'll pressurize with nitrogen and check it for leaks. Let's go ahead and cut this off. Notice I wasn't in there very long with the torch. The longer you're in there with the torch, the more likely you're going to damage something in the refrigerator. I don't think I did melt a little bit of the plastic that held the wires, but I don't think I damaged anything inside there. I know you all want to go in there and see how bad I messed it up, but we don't tell nobody. So I'm going to take the capillary tube, stick it in here for the high side. I'm going to go ahead and pinch it off. I'm going to go ahead and light that up. I'll just use the regular solder for this one. And it's sealed. So let's bring that nitrogen over here and let's pressure test it. I'll pull my rag out once I'm done checking for leaks. Carl, grab the yellow hose first. Hand me the hose, I'll hold it. And then you can just roll it closer. That's good. Hand me the gauges. And go ahead and turn. Hold on a second. Never mind, it's on.
Okay.
It's on. Just shut off your hose. Connect the hose to the valve. Why isn't this connecting? Can I have that blue bottle up there? And now I'm gonna just put some on there and see if it bubbles. No bubbles. None of the wires are damaged. I melted little plastic holders here. I probably could have protected them a little more, but none of my wires are damaged. Anybody want to take a look in there? Anybody want to look in there and take a look at it? Did we have a core for that valve or no? You
we
put
get
the
a cord.
We put the core on the high side one, right?
Yeah, we didn't get a core for that one.
I need a core. I got the cap here.
I'll grab one.
You can turn it back on, Carl. It's on. Okay, so yeah, like I said, is like you asked. The question is, to be safe, is to make sure you got all the butane out of there. And as you saw when I tried to light it, a little bit of butane was there. So we need to flush it out, and I flushed it out 3 times. I flushed it, removed the dryer filter, so it came out both sides, the capillary and the high side. So flushed out both sides of the system, and then I took the hose off and let it come back out the hose, and then I did it 2 more times, and then we didn't have any more residue of butane in there that was firing up as we lit it with a torch. Okay, so now I got the access valves on there. They said to charge it, and I think it was 56 grams was the weight. And a lot of people are going out and buying a new scale, but if they have a pretty decent scale, this one is from CPS. This one here does ounces and grams. So you could use it for 134A or 600A. Can you pass me the kit, please?
So what about the
CPS is the company. Thank you. What's the question?
So 404 is measured in what?
It's measured usually in ounces too. So we have a couple of fittings here. Here's our R-600A, and really what you want to do is you want to turn it upside down just like any other refrigerant to get the liquid refrigerant out to weigh it as you go. So the first thing you want to do is you're going to attach this. This is a little hand valve. I'm going to first make sure it's closed, and I screw it on the tank. So what this does is a valve that will, allow me to turn the tank on and off. Now the next thing I'm going to do is this little weighted piece of aluminum, and all that does is allow me to turn the tank upside down.
That's awesome.
So it sits on a scale like that. Now Vulcan sells all these parts as well as locker room tools. I purchased them from Vulcan. So now what I'm going to do is want to power it up. And I want to go ahead and once it powers up, then I'm going to press units. And this one says metric units. So at the top it says kilograms and grams. Okay. We want 56 grams. All right. So right now it reads 0. That doesn't mean there's 0. It's just zeroed out. And then as it leaves the system, it's going to go into the minus. So what we're going to do is we're going to first pull a vacuum on our system before we charge it. Okay. So let's pause it for a second there.
So I had to hit 441.
Go ahead and turn it on, the thing. Okay, so here we got this spider web of stuff. I'll wait till she comes back. It looks like a mess the way I have it connected. Rochelle,
Right here.
come on, I don't want you to miss.
Okay.
Okay, so let's first talk about what we got connected. The blue hose here, which is the low side, is connected to the process stub of the compressor. The red hose here is connected to a valve that we had added to the dryer filter. Now, remember I showed the red caps at the beginning. You can get like red electrical tape from Home Depot or Lowe's. So when you're done, wrap the valves with red tape so that anybody else after you knows it's 600A. Now, before you ever work on a system, you're always supposed to look at the model and serial number plate to know what type of gas you're dealing with from the very beginning. But the red there is put on as a safety to remind you. So I have a T-fitting here on my yellow hose. One of them is running to my vacuum pump. Can you see that on the video? So one's running to my vacuum pump, and the other one's running to here. Now right now I have this valve closed. So I'm going to run the vacuum pump. It's going to get a little noisy for a minute. I'm going to pull a vacuum on my refrigerator before I charge it. But I'm also pulling a vacuum on this hose to here, so when I charge it, I have no air in any of my hoses or lines. So we'll turn it on. My gauges are open. Both my high and my low side. If I wanted to use a micron gauge, I'd have to have it connected within this system here. If you use the hoses in the kit, you'll never really reach 500 microns. Now notice here on my pump, I have this hand valve. So when I charge through the low side, the freon's not going to run back out towards my pump here. Listen to the gurgling. You want to wait for that to go away completely to know there's very little or no air left in the system. Listen how it gets quieter as it's running. Still gurgling. I can still feel air here, so. Checking all my connections are tight. So notice this has two compressors. Why do you think it has two compressors? Actually, there's two separate systems. The refrigerator is separate from the freezer, and they're controlled by different compressors. It allows you to be a little more accurate with the temperatures in both compartments. Still get a little quieter. Should be almost like that when we're down to a good vacuum.
Are the compressors identical or are they different when they're...
I think the compressors are identical. I looked at the measurement, both the refrigerator and freezer, both take the same exact amount of refrigerant. So the compressors are most likely going to be identical as far as operation because we're running the same exact amount of refrigerant.
So the same compressor can get into the same amount of...
Remember, the compressor's just a pump, like a water pump. So as long as it's about the same capacity, you know, like 10 gallons per minute, like on a pump, it's the same thing. Can you hear it? Can you hear it getting quieter here? You don't hear as much gurgling? So, you know, there was a question, how do you know when you got the right amount of vacuum? Well, if you're not using a micron gauge, or you're using the hoses that came with the kit, it's almost impossible. Listen to what it's doing. When it gets like this, let it run just a little bit longer. Let it get as deep a vacuum as possible, because your gauges will go to 30 here really fast.
So, Rich, do you recommend like novices learn with the regular gauges like this before they get into the digital game so that they actually understand the pressures and the readings?
Digital gauges are the same. The only reason why I really don't go for them is because, let's say you're in the middle of a job and the battery dies. Now what do? Hopefully you got a second set of gauges or spare batteries.
You know how to read it.
Can you imagine not having your digital gauge doesn't light up and then you couldn't check your pressures? You couldn't charge the unit? So, I'm just going to go ahead. I'm not going to let this run for 15 minutes. I'm just going to go ahead. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to shut off this yellow hose. And that'll, hear it get quieter? So I'm going to shut off this yellow hose. And I'm going to shut off my two gauges for a second. Now I can charge through both the high and the low side. But the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my hose here. And I'm going to turn the power back on. I'm going to go to metric units. It's got to zero itself out. That's metric units. 00 kilograms, 00 grams. I want 56 grams. So I'm just going to open up one side because it's easier for me to control. And as they leave this cylinder, it's supposed to start counting. Okay. Should be going into a negative. Okay, there it is. Negative 10, 20, 30. Okay, I'm going to 30. I close it for a second. 40. That's 40 grams. Now, it's not giving me 56. There's 50. And so now I'm going to stop before I get to 60. So it's very difficult. This particular scale is not going to get down to that very, very minute reading, but it says 60, but I don't think I stopped it at 60. So once you've done that, your system's charged. We can go ahead and remove our access valves, cap these off, which we're going to get 2 caps and cap them off. I'll get some red tape over the weekend and we'll tape it off. And let's see how our system's cooling. Okay? Any questions on this? Okay, what I do want to do is I want to fire it up and I want to see my running pressures here. Okay, I'm using a set of 134A gauges and they're like, yeah, but it's 134A, you're using 600A. Remember, we're just reading pressures. We're not reading temperature. When you say 134A gauge or R22 gauge, that means the little scales inside are the temperature of the different gases, and they're written right here, which one is which. So if you're using 134A gauge, that means the inner gauge or scale is the temperature of 134A at that pressure. We just don't have 600A at that pressure. You'd have to use a temperature pressure chart. But when it says here 10 psi, it's 10 psi. It's no different. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this pump out of my way. And let's go ahead and plug the refrigerator in. Can you hear me?
You need that extension cord. Where you get those from?
I just bought them.
I mean, like, where you go?
Amazon. Okay, so the refrigerator's beeping to let me know there was a power failure. So I'm going to reset it.
You need to have y'all repair manuals ready, service manuals, ladies and gentlemen. So Miss Wardwell, going in with the tally.
Now I'm waiting for that compressor to kick on. Since it's a computer-controlled refrigerator and the power was off, the compressors don't normally kick on right away. Usually they have what they call a time delay. Because when a regular AC refrigeration system is running, the pressures are high, the compressor shuts off. If the power came on right away, the compressor try to run against that power, and that's not good. So if you notice here, we dropped down to 0 psi, and our compressor is not running yet. So let's see what happens.
See those micron boards lighting up.
Oh, it is running. Now I think it runs about 10-15 inches in a vacuum. Now we get a little blinking light here letting you know that the board is running. And that blinking light is actually used for diagnostics. I don't have the chart here to tell me like 1 blink, 2 blinks what they are. But you'll see a blink every now and then from that board. And our system's running. So all we have to do now is close off our valves. And when we put the caps on, we want to make sure our caps are really tight. Sometimes it's good maybe put a little bit of Teflon, or make sure that you got your little O-ring seal inside the cap, because you don't want that butane leaking out with all the electricals in the bottom. Okay? Now normally when we work on a system, we pinch and remove those valves, but we don't want to pinch and try to solder up the end of the pipe with the butane in there. Okay? So we would leave the valves on this system after we're done working on it. So let's let this run a minute and let's get some caps and let's cap this off. Any questions?